Chant It Down Radio's coming to you live from the Hawaiian Islands, coming from the perspective of complete freedom, coming from wisdom outside the system and then some. This is the mouthpiece of the natural bird forgotten. At this point in time, humanity's been kept from the truth, so Chant It Down Radio offers the coordinates to a path out.
You're searching for something whole, cause what you seek real life. You're watching this world unfold, the truth beneath the lies, rekindling what's been stole, the need to free one's mind, uncover the truth exposed, so people see the light. Let's chant it down so we can know. It's simple, we just break it down a little bit so we can process all. Make the switch and elevate yourself to conscious mode, and it's beneficial we can get this concept rolling. Get the future generations wanna start the whole thing with the message demonstrated. We can start a post, taking in, assimilating, getting lots of numbers, waking up the population, try to stop hypnosis.
Welcome to Chant It Down Radio, where we deprogram from the deep program. I'm Loomis, I'm your host. ChantItDownRadio.com is the website. This is episode 196. And as we've discussed in great detail on this show, there are glaring truths staring us in the face about our ancient past. And it's extremely important because it shows us that our reality is built off of a foundation of lies in this planet's true origins, where humans came from, and what has truly transpired in our ancient past. We're looking at an older, entirely different history than science and religion will dare let you onto. And it was confirmed to me even more in my recent trip to Egypt. These megalithic sites across the world cannot be replicated by us today, and yet mainstream archaeology tries to tell us that the primitive men created these sites, but the physical evidence destroys the narrative once you understand that these sites around the world have been found by later cultures, but these weren't the builders. Inspired by this even more than ever, I had to invite on Brien Forester, who is a modern Indiana Jones, an explorer of lost ancient high technology and the elongated skulls. He should need no introduction, but I'll give you a little background. After completing an honors Bachelor of Science degree, Brien decided to take up carving and sculpture full-time at the age of 25. He constructed totem poles, canoes, and even a 62-foot-long double-hull Polynesian canoe. Over the course of the next decade, he explored Polynesia, looking for the source of the Polynesian people. Once he became interested in Peru, he studied the Inca culture and was hooked and wrote a book. From there was a deep dive into the megalithic sites, which has taken him all over the world to over 90 countries. He has become an authority on the ancient elongated skulls found in Paracas and other places. He's written now 27 books. He's been on Ancient Aliens, Coast to Coast, The Unsealed, and Expedition Unknown, and a slew of podcasts. He also writes articles for GrahamHancock.com. He's a full-time explorer into our ancient megalithic past, exploring the megalithic and visits to places that defy physics and going where academics and science prohibits. Welcome to the show, Brien Forester.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. And this information has really fascinated me since I was a kid. I watched the In Search of series and the Chariots of the Gods movies from the 70s. And this is way before I even woke up to what was happening in the modern world. But you've really dug into what mainstream science should be thriving in, for starters. But why do you think the story of our ancient past has been covered up so much, and why are we given a very lame explanation of history? Why the cover-up?
Well, I think the main reason is it doesn't fit with the paradigm of academia. You know, they these professors, et cetera, went to university and were taught by their professors about their vision of the history of the world, and so they simply have been carrying this on for generation after generation, without looking into, from a multidisciplinary perspective, like bringing in geologists and engineers, et cetera, to look at the anomalies that, of course, I've seen and you as well have seen, which, you know, the more I go to Egypt or these other places, the more it becomes obvious that our history as taught in school is very limited in terms of the true reality of the history of Earth and humanity.
Yeah. Do you think there at one time it must be that some high up people did not want this original history known?
Well, I think definitely, and that's been carried on to this day. I've had quite a bit of dismissal by academia for a lot of the work that I've done, but also the work that from people I've learned from, like Graham Hancock, for example, or Christopher Dunn, and all of the other teachers that I've had from the past. They've been shunned as well, and so it's just that's why it's important to go on podcasts and make YouTube videos and things like that, simply showing the evidence and showing people that the dynastic Egyptians could not have built some of the works attributed to them. The Inca could not have done some of the work attributed to them, etc. So, the more exposure there is, the more people will wake up to the fact that we've been cheated in terms of the true history of humanity.
Yeah, and I think it's working. I think there's a lot of people that are onto this. I mean, I don't know. I'm not much of a barometer for it, but I can bring up certain things in a group of people and certain conversations, and some people don't want to go to certain taboo subjects, but this one, it seems like kind of no matter almost what background, if they're not too married to academics, they seem to accept this, because once they've kind of just taken a look at it's better if you go to the pyramids, for example, but you see that and you go, how could somebody actually make this?
No, that's a very good point. As you said, it's very important to physically go to these locations, because you really have no concept of how large the Great Pyramid is until you stand next to it.
Right.
And you see the scale and the number of stones precisely put together. And we're told that it was done by a Bronze Age civilization over the course of 25 years. It's just, the whole story has completely fallen apart at this point.
I think so. I mean, unless people are just completely, like I said, married to academia, and they don't accept any other alternative view. But it seems to me that history books start after a giant reset of some type, but they leave out that places like ancient Sumeria were highly sophisticated out of nowhere, and Egypt started highly sophisticated and evolved from each generation. Why do they not want us to know that, do you think?
Again, they're following a paradigm which is rapidly eroding. I've spent many years debating some of these people, and now they've more or less just given up and they simply ignore me at this point. And so that's why I go to the general public instead, because it's, what you and I have seen logically could not have been done by the cultures said to have done them. And so that's why it's important to simply expose the human population to the quite obvious evidence of what we see with our own eyes.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm pretty inspired because I just got back from Egypt and I got to look at all these sites with my own eyes, like you said, and with the knowledge I've learned from people like you and Graham Hancock and others. And I went to Saqqara on my first day. And for those in the audience, Saqqara is about 30 miles south of the Giza pyramids, home of the famous Step Pyramid. And I had a very annoying tour guide, and she deflected any alternative views I had on the history. I wasn't trying to bring up anything crazy, but one thing I noticed is how that many of the pyramids there, they were disintegrating, and how much more crude the construction was compared to the Giza complex. And she was saying that these were the oldest, but I think it's the opposite, and that this was the dynastic Egyptians attempting to build and replicate pyramids and buildings like that of Giza. I mean, so what do you think was there before the Step Pyramid? It obviously covers a giant shaft there, and there were other giant shafts around. I was really intrigued by how deep those shafts went down too.
Oh yeah, well, if you actually next time you go, you should enter the northern underground entrance into the Saqqara Step Pyramid, and you'll see it's quite expensive to do, but if you go with a group, it's not very expensive. But there's a whole series of tunnels that go down several levels underneath the step pyramid. And so clearly the dynastic Egyptians found the underground complex and then built the step pyramid on top of it. So academics are correct in stating that the step pyramid is the oldest of the pyramids in terms of the dynastic time period, but it was an attempt by the academics or by the dynastic people to try to replicate what the Great Pyramid looked like. So,
yeah, because there was a lot of deep shafts I saw, and I was I was seeing that. I got to sneak off and let my wife talk with the guide while I did some filming. I found remnants of a temple that looks like a giant cataclysm hit it, kind of like what I would envision what Pumapunku may have went through. I found drill holes in giant rocks and a stone that was completely cut on one side flat, like laying up. I mean, do you have any idea what may have gone on there? Have you looked into that? I'm sure you probably have.
Well, I wrote a book called Aftershock about that, looking at ancient sites around the world, mainly in Egypt and Peru and Bolivia, but other locations like Easter Island. Mm-hmm. And it seems quite clear that during the Younger Dryas period, about 13,000 years ago, there were a series of cataclysms that hit the planet. Most of the damage you see is on the western surfaces, so that suggests that the force came from the east. The bent pyramid, for example, in Egypt, you can see that the western surfaces were heavily damaged by some kind of force. Pumapunku was completely buried by a giant wall of mud. Machu Picchu, the core of it was more or less pulled apart from east to west. Mm-hmm. And of course, then we see all the damage in Egypt, especially around the Giza Plateau area, where you see all this damage on the western surfaces.
Yeah, so something big happened, whether it was a cataclysm one or possibly more. Do you think it was like the Great Flood? I feel like maybe just from my own research could have been part of something bigger that happened as well. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. Again, it seems like this series of events took place over the course of about 1,000 years. So there was a lot of different events that happened that hit the planet. Of course, we also see the underground cities in Turkey that could not have been made with bronze tools, which is what they suggest. The huge complexes that go down 20 stories underground. These cities are connected by tunnels that go on for miles and miles. You couldn't do that with hand tools. So again, there's so many different locations that show this incredible destruction, as well as at Baalbek in Lebanon, Petra in Jordan, Easter Island, etc. Right,
because the Easter Island statues a lot of them are just buried by what looks like a mud flood almost, or a landslide, I guess.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. And I also had, at one point, I had geologist Robert Schock with me on Easter Island.
Oh, nice.
And the distinction is there are two styles of the figures. There are ones that are 6 to 8 feet tall, and then there are other ones up to 30 feet tall. So obviously it was two different cultures. The Polynesians came maybe 1,000 years ago and found the giant ones there, sometimes buried all the way, up to their necks or even to the tops of their heads. And so they tried to replicate on a smaller scale, but then the larger ones would have taken very advanced technology to cut from the bedrock shape and then move into position. So he had no problem in believing that some of the larger ones could be 12,000 years old. That, again, is our time frame of when this destruction could have happened.
Yeah, I think that lines up pretty good too. Is it your thoughts that, you mentioned a lot about ancient machining and machinery. Is it your thoughts that this advanced people, whoever they were that built these megalithic sites, are humans that learned it from possibly some off-world source, some higher knowledge? Or do you think it's just humans that already had an advanced civilization? I guess you probably don't fully know the answer to that, but you know, you obviously, you can see, you point out these drill hole marks and these saw marks. I mean, this is stuff that not diamond saw could even do today.
No, that's true. It'd be very difficult with even diamond equipment. And diamond drills and saws were invented around the 1860 AD time period in the United States. So since we see so much evidence of drill holes, especially in Egypt, it's clear there was a very advanced civilization that had tools more sophisticated than what we even have today. So it was either a very advanced human civilization or series of civilizations which were wiped out during the cataclysms, or it was an off-world influence. And I'm open to both. Yeah.
I guess there's no way to conclude that until we have more evidence. I'm wondering, so you talked about cataclysm, and something I think I heard you talking about, it was you, is that I went to Karnak, and I heard you talking about the Central Avenue in Karnak, and how if you take a compass to what's supposed to be north, south, east, and west, it comes out 23 degrees off, which says that the Earth used to be straight up on its axis and not tilted like it is today. Is there more evidence around the world that shows this to be true from your findings?
Yeah, there's one of the complexes at Pumapunku is quite far off alignment as well. But it's mainly in Egypt where you see that. Other sites like the Ramesseum, which is pretty close to Karnak. Also Luxor. Did you go to Luxor?
Yeah, I did.
So you notice that the largest statues are at the entranceway. Right. You know, 600, 800 ton, made out of one block of stone. Yeah. And then as you walk down that avenue, all of a sudden it jogs to the left. So it's not logical that both were done during the same time period. It seems quite clear that the entranceway with the big statues was discovered by the dynastic people, and then they built a big complex, you know, farther along down that avenue.
Yeah. And that's the avenue of the Sphinx too, that connects the two, the Sphinxes, or whatever you call it, right? It connects them straight to Karnak and Luxor.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the Avenue of the Sphinxes, which was just opened up a few months ago. Yeah.
I didn't walk the whole thing, but I saw a little bit. It was just too hot. It was like 100. It was like 43 Celsius. So it was really hot. I just couldn't handle it. And I think I need to go back when it's cooler. So we're looking at like these statues that were so big. Do you think they were carved by the dynastic Egyptians? Because they do look like humanoid figures. Are they carved by the older people? Because it seems like a lot of these megalithic sites weren't really filled with art at all. Like you go inside the pyramid, it's completely nothing in there. There's no writing. It's just completely smooth walls, and there's nothing in there. So were these statues, like the ones in front of Luxor you're talking about, carved by the dynastic Egyptians, or were they carved by the older civilization, do you think?
Yeah, by the older civilization, definitely. You'll also notice that almost all of them are attributed to the time of Ramses II. But during his time, again, they still had mainly bronze tools. Bronze cannot cut hard stone like that. And these statues are one piece of granite. The granite was brought from Aswan, which is hundreds of miles away. And they're so finely polished that they also didn't have the technology to be able to polish stone with such high, brilliant reflection. Because, there are other statues, especially in the Cairo Museum, that are quite roughly made. And so those would have been the dynastic people, but the finely finished ones clearly were done by a very advanced group.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to the subject of giants. I don't know what to say, but I mean, I went to the the Colossi of Memnon, and do you think that we are looking at a giant race of beings in the ancient day? Because when I went to the coffins of the Serapeum, which were supposedly for these Apis bulls, I think that's bullshit. But where you have these giant statues, also like the Colosseum Memnon, depicting giant people, and then you have a small person next to it, or that of Abu Simbel, or even the Sumerian cylinders, show big people and little people, or even the Moai statues, and many other places too. I mean, conventional science would tell us that they made these people bigger to show their importance, but I'm not so sure about that. I'm wondering what you think about giants involved with this.
Well, it's quite possible. You also notice that some of these complexes too, the gates and things like that are so much higher than a normal person. And of course, academics, again, will say, well, that was symbolic. They wanted to have something look huge like that just because it would make the pharaoh look like he was super important. But pragmatically, it could be because these people were very tall, and that if there were any normal humans living at that time, that they would be idolized as being the equivalent of gods. So, I'm not really big on the study of giants compared to other people, but I'm definitely open to the concept. Unfortunately, of course, we don't have any bones that are on public display that show, that there were huge people, but there are coffins in the Cairo Museum that are 12 to 13 or 14 feet tall that would not have been made for symbolic purposes, most likely, but were made to house somebody who was very big. And governments such as the Egyptian and others are probably hide anything which doesn't fit their narrative, into warehouses and things away from the prying eyes of even academia.
Yeah, I think they would, because those coffins in the Serapeum, I mean, they are massive, and it even seems like they must have stopped building in the middle of one, because you see that one that's stuck in the hallway. It's like they never finished.
Yeah, again, it looks like a cataclysm hit the Serapeum, because, as you said, there are boxes in different stages of construction. Some are finally finished. Some are, the lid hasn't been put on top of them yet. Yeah. Some weigh 40 tons, some weigh up to 100 tons. Again, it's most likely that the stone came from Aswan, which is hundreds of miles away. How would it be transported when you're not close to the Nile? So they can't use that excuse that they were shipped on barges or something like that. And the Serapeum is also larger than what we've been told. The last time I went in October of last year, they were doing excavations in another section of the Serapeum, which shows that it's much bigger than what the public can see, which, hopefully that'll be open to the general public within a year or two.
Yeah, because it seems like you're getting access, and other people too, to some of these sites that have been taboo for years. Like I saw a video where you went around the Sphinx enclosure and down the shaft of Osiris, I think it was. And those areas are been off limits forever. So I guess what, you have to pay a large sum of money?
Yeah, you do. Again, that's why we go with a pretty big group, because it costs about $3,000 for 2 hours, but when you divide that between 50 people, it's not much at all.
Yeah, that's better.
And so that works. And each time I go to Egypt, something else has been opened that I haven't been able to access. So that's why I keep going back once a year, is because there's always something that was taboo that is now open to special permission if you pay the right amount of money.
Yeah. Well, that's better than it used to be. I could say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be going back. I don't know when, but definitely it's sparked a lot within me. It's a long trip, though, from Hawaii. I don't think I want to do that for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did the cheap route and did a 16-hour flight from LA to Dubai. I'll never do that again.
Oh, God. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Still recovering. But so I was going to ask you, you've been to a lot of sites all around the world, and have you, like for me, going to Machu Picchu and the Giza Plateau, it's just too crowded to actually feel the energy of these places when there's too many people, at least for me. Have you ever felt any powerful energy coming from these sites, or any sort of magnetic anomalies or any sort of things that kind of made you feel like these have some kind of an energy, a mana or whatever?
Yeah, I think there's still residual energy left, not as powerful as they were originally, but I always go to these locations like super energetic and excited, and by the end of the day, I'm completely wiped out. So there's some kind of interaction between, my body's energy and the locations, and that happens in Egypt, it happens in Peru, it happens in Bolivia, and all sorts of other places where, I'm super excited to go, but by the end of the day, I'm just wiped out.
Yeah. I mean, I thought maybe that was just because it was crowded and had some people haggling me, and I was just like, all right, I just need to get out of here after a while. But maybe it is the energy of these places. I just wasn't able to take it in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's get into Elongated Skulls. I know this is one of your big works, so I'm super interested in it too. I guess you've been getting new findings all the time. Are these elongated skulls found all over the planet, or are they mainly in Peru? Or how have you noticed that they're everywhere, or are they just mainly where you're at?
Well, cranial deformation has been done by many different cultures over the course of time, most commonly about 2,000 years ago. So like many locations like Western Africa and Melanesia, all over parts of South America, into the U.S., Australia, etc. But the only ones that appear to be natural looking are the ones located very close to where I am at Paracas in Peru. And we've had a number of medical experts come and look at them. And because of the physical anomalies to the skulls, they've all stated that they don't know exactly what it is that they're looking at, because they don't fit anything that they studied in medical school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess it would imply that there was some kind of royal or godlike culture for people to want to emulate that type of person, because I didn't know, you said Australia and Melanesia, I didn't know that they did that too. So there must have been something here that made people really want to be like them. They must have had maybe higher cranium, maybe higher thinking capacity through those big skulls. I don't know. I have no idea, but they must have had some kind of envy, huh?
Yeah, well, definitely all these different cultures were emulating somebody.
Yeah.
Because you don't just bind a baby's head, for the sake of it. There has to be some kind of factual basis for what you're, for why you're doing this. And the Maya did cranial deformation, and many, many different cultures. But we've been able to do some DNA analysis of the ones here on the coast of Peru, and the results were very surprising, to say the least. Most academics think that they were Native American lineage, but genetically we figured out that they weren't. The most closely related skulls in the world are found around the Black Sea around the same time frame. So genetically, they match up.
That's really strange. And a lot of them have red hair. I think that's really weird. Do they all have red hair? Or I guess some of them don't have hair, but is that what you've noticed?
Yeah, the oldest ones here on the coast of Peru, the royal bloodline were red-headed people. And that doesn't fit in with, standard people, Indians crossing the Bering Land Bridge kind of theory, because they're all black-haired, of course. And so obviously these people came from somewhere else. So that's the story of that.
Yeah, that's really weird. I mean, when I think of red-haired people, I think of Irish. I mean, that's just the first thing that comes in mind. But that kind of fair-skinned people doesn't seem like would do well in Peru. But hey, I don't know. I don't know if you've even had a chance to know if these people had light or dark skin Is there any indication that they did?
Well, it's most likely that they did have light-colored skin because red hair is associated with people of light skin color. And red hair goes back actually to the Middle East. It goes back to areas around Iraq and Iran. So more modern times, you think of the Irish and the Scots, but and the Scandinavians. But it goes way back thousands of years to the Middle East area. There's still, people to this very day who are very light-skinned with red hair and blonde hair who live in the Middle East. But of course, those were the people that ISIS were trying to wipe out. And even the name Russia means the red-headed people. So Russia's history also comes from that.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is just a Native American lore about red-haired giants, and there is a legend of a tribe killing a red-haired giant in a cave where they burned him in. I think it was called Lovelock Cave. It's somewhere in Nevada. Have you tried to compare that to these? Because these are red-haired people apparently too on the North American continent.
Yeah, exactly. Lovelock Cave is probably the most famous location where the Paiute people, supposedly these giants were living in a cave, and so the Paiute took a lot of brush and branches and things like that and lit a fire in front of the cave, and that caused the inhabitants of the cave to die. But unfortunately, all the bones, the giants' bones from there have been taken away by different governmental agencies, and so there's no evidence of them anymore. There are even stories that the Smithsonian have destroyed many different giant skeletons that they had. The author L.A. Marzulli did some research on Catalina Island off of California, where he found an early photograph of what appeared to be about a 9-foot tall giant of some kind. So there's a lot of oral tradition about giants in North America that, and so many stories that they can't all have been made up.
No, definitely not. They couldn't have just been made up out of thin air. Most of these things were accurate. I know that a lot of these, I can think of in Hawaiian culture where I live, a lot of the legends are a little bit, maybe like in song, poetic a little bit, but they're still talking about something that happened for real. They're not trying to embellish. And I know that a lot of people here will say, and I can see that an oral culture could lose its stories over time, but it would be kind of weird if they just decided to make up giants with red hair when they have no reference point to it.
No, it's a good point. And of course, the main story there is about the Menehune. But there's a book called Tales from the Night Rainbow, which you can probably still buy, which is an incredible read. It's only about 130 pages. It was written by a Hawaiian lady who lived to be 115, and she told her story of her people, the Hawaiian people, and she said that in that book, she said that the word Menehune does not mean little people. It means people of little power, because when the Tahitians invaded Hawaii, they were absolutely warlike and very nasty to the resident population, and these older people were supposedly exterminated to a great extent. But if you go to Kauai, there's still people there that have reddish hair. I can't remember what they the word that they call it, but I think it's called Ehu. Yeah, but there's still people who have reddish hair, which is genetic, that goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It's not the result of European people coming in. And of course, on the little island off Kauai, whose name I forget at the moment too.
Ni'ihau?
Yeah, Ni'ihau. Supposedly, the resident population are still mainly Hawaiian, and supposedly that's where the majority of people who have genetic red hair still live.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I you can't go there unless you're invited. So I guess I'm probably not going because no one knows me there. But that'd be interesting because they actually speak the original tongue. They don't have I think it's about 4 or 5 letters removed from the standardized Hawaiian alphabet, and they still speak with those letters in, at least the dialect that they spoke, which would be very interesting.
No, it's a great point. So supposedly there were different dialects in Hawaii, and then it was all watered down and made into one because it made it easier for the missionaries to be able to have one copy for everybody to learn. But in some of the dialects, the L used to be an R, I think, and
the T's, the K's used to be T's.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of manipulation that went on, I think, so people couldn't also find their root culture and go back to it. I feel it was done on purpose, possibly. But we have, a lot of mysteries in Hawaii, but we don't have many megalithic sites. We have, but I did show you that, and I'll have to do a video on it, explore further, but I think I may have found a buried pyramid here on the island. Have you ever seen any other, because I know you explored Polynesia a bit, have you seen any other pyramid structures in Polynesia?
I've seen sites in Tahiti that don't fit in with the standard academic time frame. Yeah. There are some sites on Molokai which have been carbon dated at being 4,000 years old. So that's older than the standard story of how old the Hawaiian population is. Also, when I was living in Hawaii, since I was quite close to many Hawaiian people, I heard a lot of stories from them about their actual history. And some believed, the standard story is that the Tahitians arrived and took over Hawaii, but according to some traditions, it was actually Hawaiians who went to Tahiti. So the reverse story, and that Hawaii is much, much older than what standard academia talks about, and that 12,000 plus years ago, almost all the islands were connected together.
Yeah, Lemuria, maybe?
Yeah, it could have been Mu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is some stone structures in the middle of this island, Oahu. You may have been to them. They're called the Kukani local birthing stones. And I went to a lecture there once, and a guy from the Bishop Museum was there telling people that the people that were born there were called the people of the Hu, H-U, but he thinks that it was actually originally called the people of Mu, and these were the royalty that were born at these stones. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Again, in this book, Tales from the either from or of the Night Rainbow, that's what this lady talked about, and she actually had the book done just for her family so that they would know their genealogy. But it wound up being published, and quite a few editions came out. But that's what she talked about, that the original people were called the Mu, and that's what the landmass was also called.
Oh yeah, wow. I'll have to read that book. I just wrote it down, so I have not read that book. That sounds pretty fascinating. Tale of the Night Rainbow.
It's great. Yeah. It's a great book.
Yeah, sounds good. Getting back to the elongated skulls, it's very fascinating. So it seems that these beings are integrated with human DNA. I mean, are they not totally human? It seems like they kind of are, aren't they? Or I know their eye sockets are bigger, and they don't have a sagittal suture mark. And so that's very strange. And that would mean, I hate to sound graphic, but that's why the woman can birth a child, because the child's cranium can smush together to come out. Well, that would have been quite the different experience for whoever birthed these giant skulls that were also, the babies looked like they were bigger. Their head was just about as big as their torso.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've seen actual examples of newborns that where the head was the size of the torso in different museums here. And also there are some drawings from the 19th century that showed that as well.
Yeah.
Also, fortunately, a few years ago, the nuclear DNA was actually analyzed, which is the father's side DNA of two of the skulls that I once had was the caretaker of, and there was no human match between the DNA from those skulls and anything known to be human.
Wow, that's interesting. So these beings, you've carbon dated them, or someone has, I suppose?
Yeah, we've done a little bit of carbon dating. No academics have bothered to do it, which is really kind of stupid.
Yeah.
Because they have a timeline that they claim, but they can't back it up with radiocarbon testing. But we did, and a few of them were 2,400 years old, which is pretty old, and kind of matches what they predict. But you don't know until you've done a lot more testing of more of the natural looking skulls to find out what the real story is.
Yeah, because that's not really that long ago compared to some things. So that means that they were alive and walking around with regular humans. And I guess I think I heard you talk about that it looked like some type of genocide with these elongated skull people that had happened. Like they were royalty in their burial. So obviously there must have been some kind of revolt or other culture that decided to kill them off. Is that your findings?
Yeah, it's at the latter end of their existence, which was around 100 AD, the so-called Nazca people moved in from the north and took over their land. And it seems that they tried to exterminate the royal bloodline, but some of them escaped and were able to get into the highlands of Peru and go to Cusco. And so they were most likely part of the genetic bloodline that would become the Inca, because when the Spanish entered Cusco in the 16th century, they noticed these tall, red-haired, light-skinned people walking around. And when they asked the local people who were they were told they're the last of the Viracochas, which was a very ancient bloodline.
Oh.
And again, very occasionally, if you walk the streets of Cusco, you'll see people with a very dark red hair, which is genetic.
Interesting. So yeah, I always thought Viracocha was just one god or one being, but it's actually more of like a race of beings. Is that what you're saying?
Well, actually, the correct name for them was the Wiracochan, whereas the creator god was called Viracocha. So it's probably those who were sent by Viracocha to educate the population. So they were called the Wiracochan.
Okay. Huh. Interesting. Because that is apparently what is on, I haven't been there, but is it on the Sun Gate at Tiwanaku where there's a kind of a bearded looking kind of thing on there? Is that bearded, or is it?
Yeah, that's actually what's called the subterranean courtyard, which is a courtyard you walk down into. And there are a few figures there that show a full beard. And they date from the Tiwanaku culture, so they're 1,000 to 2,000 years old. And native people don't tend to have facial hair, so they were depicting somebody who was anomalous.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Is there any indication that these elongated skull people made, say, the Nazca lines or any megalithic structures around there?
Yeah, there are no megalithic structures on the coast of Peru because it's all sand. But the Nazca figures were made over the course of 1,000 years by two different cultures. First, the Paracas elongated skull culture were responsible for the majority of them. And then when the Nazca took over, they continued constructing them. So there's something like, if you fly over Nazca, you'll see mainly the ones made by the Nazca people, like the famous hummingbird and spider. But then in between Paracas, which is where I am, and Nazca, there's another area called Palpa, and there are 1,600 small geoglyphs carved on the tops of mesas.
Huh. And so those can be seen. So I haven't been to the Nazca lines. That'll be my next trip to Peru someday to see that too. But a lot of them you can only see by air, right? But some can you see by with like a nearby hillside, or how's that work?
Yeah, you can see some of them from the nearby mountain. It's quite a mountainous area. You know, it's not all flat. It's flat, but there are also volcanoes in the background. So if you climb one of the volcanoes in the background, you can look down and see them. And that's where the first Peruvian archaeologist was able to spot them. And then later by early plane flights. But yeah, the ones on tops of the mesas can only be seen from something like a balloon or an airplane or a helicopter.
Right. Yeah, and that's why people say they can only be made for someone in flight. Have you actually walked around the Nazca lines and like been on where they're carved on the ground there?
No, it's highly illegal. And if you try to, the tourist planes that take tourists with flights over the lines, of course, are always looking down at the ground. And so if they see anybody walking there, they automatically phone the police, and the police show up within 5 minutes and get people out of there. So,
well, I guess that's good in a way, because you wouldn't want anybody to destroy them.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to see I guess there's no way to carbon date them either, though, huh? Because it's all just rock. So how would they know?
Yeah, it's all sand.
Yeah, sand. Yeah, so there was a mummy that was found. I don't know. I'm not sure how many years ago. You probably know more. But it was found, and it had 3 fingers, and it was, I guess, fabricated. What's your thoughts on that? Why would someone go through that effort just kind of to throw the science off, or what happened with that?
That's a good question. It is highly likely that it was fake, and I've seen videos made by people in the Nazca area who still make them, like they make them for collectors. So in the case of that one called Maria, what they did is they took an elongated, like they found 2 mummies. One was from a Paracas person, and one was from a later Nazca person. They removed the head and the neck simply by soaking the mummies in water. All of a sudden, the skin became much more pliable again. So they were able to pull the head off one and stick it on the body of another. And then x-rays have been done of the hands, showing that the bones are not properly lining up. So some of the bones are backwards, some are taken from other bodies. So yeah, I mean, the company Gaia did quite a number of videos about them, but they never had an actual archaeologist or medical doctor look at them, as far as I can tell. They had people called doctors, but they were doctors of philosophy, I think, or something. So the more evidence that comes in, the more it seems like the whole thing was faked.
Yeah, that's pretty lame when you think about it, because that's just making it look like people like you and I and everybody that into this are just a bunch of kooks when they do that. It's kind of just like throwing in something that throws it all off, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad.
They did actually carbon date it, and it turned out to be around, I think, 1,800 years old. So it fits in with the Nazca time frame. If they carbon dated it and it was 10,000 years old, then that would be really intriguing. But it fits in with the standard date that the Nazca existed. So that's another reason why it's probably faked. Because there are lots of bodies buried around Nazca that tomb robbers dig up and do awful things with.
Yeah. Here's a kind of a wild card question for you, but because I don't know if you cover this or not, but it's kind of emerging and a bit interesting, because we had this high-tech ancient culture that apparently built all these megalithic sites, but a lot of people today are talking about Tartaria. I mean, what are your thoughts on Tartaria? Have you looked into it at all?
A little, and I don't see that there's a lot of evidence for it. So yeah. I know people were pushing that, especially I think 2 or 3 years ago. And I kept getting comments in my videos about, it's all from Tartaria. And it's like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I haven't found anything that shows me any proof on that either. And that, they're trying to say that there's these buildings were energy devices, but I don't know. I think it was just architecture. A lot of what I've looked at, and a lot of it's like duplicating ancient Roman architecture or even Egyptian. But there is a suggestion that these obelisks were energy devices. Is that right? Possibly some of these.
Yeah, I think so, because the obelisks were strategically positioned in Egypt. It's not that they were simply put up somewhere and then, some dead pharaoh's name was carved into it or whatever. There's, especially at Karnak, they're strategically lined up into a grid. So that would suggest that they were involved in energy. Also, the fact that each one was made from a single piece of granite, which is very difficult to shape.
Yeah.
And the biggest one at Luxor, I think, is 450 tons. That's not an easy feat. It seems that they were made for reasons of energy or resonance, because there is a broken one at Karnak lying on the ground that you used to be able to go right up to and pound on with your fist, and it had a ringing tone. It would go bong.
Wow.
So that seems to show that they were tuned. And then along with that, it's likely that the original pyramids were the transmitters of, collectors and transmitters of energy, and that the energy would then go to the obelisk where the energy would be utilized for something.
Why do you think it is today in, like Washington, D.C., and I think in Paris and places they have obelisks? Do you think there's anything other than just decoration that they're trying to use them for?
Well, it's interesting that there's one at the Vatican.
Yeah.
Right in the center of the Vatican is an obelisk that was taken from Egypt. And so, there's probably some kind of esoteric secret society reason why these things were moved such great distances from their original location. Probably, something symbolic. Not that they're still usable for their intended purpose, but for some reason to say, we have, our God is the great God who's conquered these lesser gods, or something like that.
Yeah, I guess that's a good answer. Yeah, definitely. Well, we're almost out of time here. Got about an hour. We've done about an hour. So I thought I'd ask you what your next projects are, what you're getting into, any new things you're doing.
Not as much as in the past, because of the obvious thing we spent 2 years having to, dodge. But we have a tour in Peru in June. And then in September, I'm going to a conference in Colorado at the Gaia complex. And then November, we have another tour, which is Peru and Bolivia. And then April of next year, I'm going back to Egypt again. So I'm not sure what else will fill in the space or time, but it seems like things are opening up much more in recent weeks and months. So other adventures could, farther afield than Peru could be happening. I think it was today that the U.S. airlines were told that people don't have to wear face masks anymore. So as that opens up more of the world, then there'll be much more opportunity to start to travel again.
Yeah, that's good. Any thoughts on, since you mentioned that, any of this DNA manipulation that could be going on? Have you looked into that at all?
Meaning what?
Through these things that we're trying to avoid in the atmosphere.
I don't honestly know. I think there's been too much hype about that, because they've created so many of these, billions of them at this point, that there's no way that they could have like a chip inside of them or something like that. Yeah. But I'm not afraid of the vaccine. It's just I don't like the idea of mandating them to people, because that's forcing someone to do something with their body that they may not want to do. So, but yeah, I think early on there was way too much hype about that that they were like really bad for you or something. But I don't know that many people have been grossly affected by them, whether they're beneficial or not. I think they're going to start, the effectiveness is going to start wearing off anyway. So they can't keep jabbing people with more of these things. They're going to have to simply give, like places like Israel have given up on them because they're just not effective enough. So hopefully that'll take place in other parts of the world as well, and we can return to actual normal again.
Yeah, I hope so, because then you can, do what you do and everybody can travel again. The reason I went to Egypt is simply because I can go there just by testing, and that's even going away, I think, soon. So things are kind of looking up. I don't really know what to expect in the future with this world. It's pretty crazy. Anyway, I appreciate you coming on, Brien. And do you have any last words or any thing you want to tell the audience?
No, just very thankful to be able to share the information. I'm glad of the work that you're doing. There are a lot more people now who have YouTube channels who are more or less saying the same thing. So the more that happens, the better for everybody. That this information is being reinforced by others and is going out. And academics don't have a defense to keep their stated positions about how old certain things are, because they can't justify it based on actual science. So I think the future looks very bright for the spreading of this information. And we'd like to do this again at some point if you would like to.
Sure, I'd like to go on one of your expeditions sometime. If you do group things, I'll try to catch up with you one time. Yeah, right on. Well, thanks, Brien, for coming on, and we'll keep in touch.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, that was great. Great podcast with Brien Forester. Great guest to have on. Important information. A true Indiana Jones, someone that actually goes out there and seeks these ancient mysteries for himself and joins a bunch of people that are seeing the same picture, and it's undeniable. And the importance of this picture, the importance of this info should be put as priority. Because think about it. If we don't know our true Earth's history, then how are we supposed to understand who we are and why we're here? No, I mean, if you're listening to this show, which you probably have listened for a while, and if you're a new listener, welcome. We know our purpose is deeper than what we're doing, going around driving in these cars to and from work, and and collecting pieces of paper and being systemites. But this info, really gets down to things that are at the utmost importance to really reveal that, well, wait a minute. This Earth is older, so who were these people that were making these sites? Were they the elongated skull people? Possibly. But I also believe in a populated universe, so it could have been a variety of different people. We live in a place in the world where we've been quarantined off. I hate using that word now, but cleansed off from the rest of the different species of whatever you want to call it that have been on this earth, these legends, these myths. And, I never asked Brien if he thought that these elongated skull people were alien, but he is open to the idea. And he likes to stay based in fact, and I like that too, but if you think about it, if these are the beings that came, whether it's the elongated skull people or whoever built these megalithic sites, these people had advanced knowledge.
Where did they get it from? Where did it come from? And so more than likely, if we're to think that, humans were just here before the cataclysms that happened, then where do they get this knowledge from? Where did it all come from? It seems like it would have come from off-world, Who were these teachers that taught these indigenous cultures to build these, or to civilize and become part of civilization, which isn't always a good thing, obviously. So it doesn't mean that these were divine beings, which I know they weren't. But I've gone over all this, and I didn't make this part of the Beyond Earth series yet, and I kind of am going back and forth in my mind, and I'm feeling like I might not, and just keep it just as I have the guest on, Brien Forester. But if you see in parentheses Beyond Earth series next to it, that just means it's part of a series of shows. It's into all this too, but I didn't really necessarily go alien on this. But I like to keep it grounded in things, in facts too, and we just don't know. We don't have an idea of our past yet, our ancient past. We have bits and pieces, and we're working off of what we have. But what you can see is obviously not what you've been told, and therefore there needs to be more answers. And the only way to get answers is to dig for it yourself, like Brien's doing. So I'm really happy to have him on. I just got back from Egypt, as you probably heard on the podcast, and Egypt was a fascinating place. My first time to the Middle East, my first time to the continent of Africa, and it was an amazing experience, and what a culture shock it is compared to being here in Hawaii. What a different way of life, and it just shows me that there's so many different ways to live on planet Earth, and there's so many different realities out there that one can live on this planet. Cairo is an insane city, 25 million, and you do not want to drive there. It's insane, so I didn't. But overall, the food's good if you like Middle Eastern food. And, there's a lot of things I didn't like about Egypt. And basically what it was everybody's out to scam you, and everybody's out to, make a buck off something, and it's like I was in some of these temples, and the security guard is like waving me close. Hey, I'm going to show you this thing. Okay. And then he's waiting there for me to tip him, and I'm not a cheap person. I don't mind tipping people. These people don't have a lot of money. Okay. But it gets old after a while. Or maybe I want to look in a store. I'm not much of a shopper, but, I might be interested in something in a store. But instead the guy comes out and haggles you and harasses you to where you don't even want to, because he wants you to buy so badly, you don't even want to go in that store anymore because you don't want to be pressured to buy. And that's just kind of a irritating thing about being a tourist in Egypt. But, I didn't go there really for those things. I went there to see these ancient megalithic sites for myself. And just like Brien said, you have to go to these places yourself to actually take it all in. Yeah, you can watch something like Ancient Aliens, and you can see these things on there and go, wow, yeah. But when you're actually there, it's a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing. It's a taking in, and that's why I do promote travel. It's a hard time to travel, yeah. But it's getting better, and that's why I'm a world traveler, because I like to actually physically experience a place. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making a documentary with a lot of footage I took in Egypt, and it's not going to be a big documentary or anything, it's zero budget here, but it'll be on my YouTube channel, which is Truth-Filled Trajectory, and I'm going to be putting together, basically a look at how absurd it is that modern day academics think this stuff is, where when you actually look at it, it's obviously something way bigger. So some of the stuff in this podcast that I talk with Brien, if you're, not really knowledgeable about Egypt at all, I'll be showing things in that documentary, and that documentary will, I don't know when it's going to come out. I'm thinking I'm not going to get into it probably and make it until probably June or even July. I'm slow at things like that. I want to take my time. It might be one of those, I don't know, a 3-part series. That's what I'm thinking, like 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, short little videos I'll link together. But I'll do it as professional as I can with the budget I have, and just, you can do a lot these days with computers, so I'll be doing that. And so that's coming out soon. So you'll be looking for that on my if you haven't subscribed to Truth-Filled Trajectory. I know a lot of you haven't, but hopefully a lot of you out there, if you're a new listener, subscribe to this show as well. The Chant It Down Radio has been around for 9 years, coming up on 9 years, and it's a lot of material to check out, lots of different subject matter. Don't be afraid to dive into the archives. I'll be guesting on a few shows soon. In fact, I'm going to be pretty busy with podcasting this year, as I promised at the beginning of the year. This is the year that I kind of take this forward. I'm going to be doing some live streams in a while, and making this show more than it is right now, more than it's been all these years. I work a full-time job. I have a family, so I don't get to do this all the time like some people you may listen to. This is what I get to do when I get to do it, and I'm happy to be able to do it and do it as much as I can in the time that I have. So it's great, but if you want to support the show, you can always, financially support. Go to the website, and there's ways to donate. I know a lot of you don't. I don't like asking for money, but it does help me be able to prioritize this show more when I'm able to be financially looked after a little bit better. But, if not, just help spread the word. Because this show, I've never been a big promoter of my own show. It's just like, here, I throw it out and you take it and run with it, and that's it. But this year, this show is going to go a lot bigger. So I think that's good. So expect the most from this show this year. And I just wanted to comment on the end part there when I talked to Brien about the arm spear, because I'm going to put this on YouTube. He kind of brought it up a little bit, and I just had to ask. There has been he's right, there's been way too much hype with it. There's been a lot of people running with it, and I've said this before on the show, and I'm saying it again, because I'm an old school truth speaker, and I've been talking about this for a long time, a lot of stuff, and I've seen the different stages that people go through when they first wake up. A lot of people woke up from COVID. A lot of people woke up and they saw that it wasn't what they were saying, and so they woke up. But when people wake up right away, they often get kind of fanatical about the information, and they put too much out about things that maybe aren't true. And I've noticed that. There's a lot going around, especially now with this Watch the Water documentary that went viral. I don't know, and I don't think it's good, and I don't think you should get one. I mean, why would you, People are dying, and that is true. But the actual hype about it has seemed to be a lot more than what it is. I know a lot of people that have gotten it, and I'm not happy that they did. They didn't listen to me, but they seem to be okay, at least right now. We just don't know the long-term effects. But I just thought I'd ask him about that at the end there, because it sort of seemed natural. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this show, and I'm going to be doing many more. So don't worry. I'm getting close to episode 200. I'm going to be doing guests all the way up to there, and please spread the word. Subscribe to it on any podcast feed. Share it with your friends and family, and be a warrior, not a warrior. I'm out of here.